Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to spelling differences. Specifically, lesser-known spelling differences that nobody ever talks about. For instance, you might remember my recent YouTube short in which I talked about how in Britain we used to spell sulphur with PH. And after I posted that short, millions or dozens of you came to me and said, Lawrence, I for one love it when you get all obscure, because constantly hearing about how Brits and Americans spell centre and theatre and aluminium differently is just not the sort of invigorating content that I seek if spelling is something you find invigorating. And so if you were one of the many that saw that YouTube short, then thanks for being a subscriber. If you're not yet subscribed, do that now. In the meantime, get your notepads out because this spelling party is going to be absolutely bananas. I'm just trying to think how to spell bananas. When I brought this subject up to my patrons on my most recent secret live stream, one of my patrons, DJK, pointed out the massive difference in how Brits and Americans spell the word manoeuvre. Now, perhaps the first thing you'll notice about the word manoeuvre is the end of the word. In British English, we retain the RE suffix, which is French, and makes us look smarter than we are. In American English, of course, they switch it for ER. Now, this by itself is not that surprising. We've all seen words that do this. The theatre is a good example. But perhaps the part of this word that DJK found most eye-opening was the fact that we just stick an O in the middle of it, right before an E, which is not an uncommon sight in British English. Take, for example, this word that I picked out at random, diarrhea, which in Britain is spelled D-I-A-R-R-H-O-E-A. I bet some Americans think that's alphabet diarrhea. Well, if that's true, just wait until you hear about how we spell feces. But back on the subject of manoeuvre, it might surprise you to discover that both spellings used to exist in American English. Well, this chap by the name of Noah Webster, who thought he was some sort of founding father or something, wrote this book what had lots of words in it, and he called it The American Dictionary of the English Language. And this is one of the most important books in American history because it standardized the English language on American terms. Until then, you had words that were floating around with all manner of different spellings and nobody could agree which was the official one. So he decided, I'm going to come up with the official spellings of this country in order to simplify the language and stick it to the Brits. When the first edition of his dictionary was published in 1828, the word manoeuvre did feature in it. He decided right there and then that the really long version that we still use in Britain today was bloody hard to spell, and I'll hold my hands up. To this day, I don't know how to spell manoeuvre just from memory. So he preferred the one that was less French looking because he also wanted to stick it to the French, apparently. And after a few decades of the dictionary being able to breathe, that spelling took hold in American English. But Webster wasn't done there, which brings us on to U-dropping, which is not a technical term, but one that I just made up to mean he didn't like the letter U. We've seen evidence of this in words like colour, and the observant among you will realise that American English did the same to flavour and honour, and all manner of French-derived words that end in O-U-R. But it isn't only those words where Webster and others did this to the letter U. Take, for example, the word mould. And you might be thinking, Lawrence, there are different definitions of the word mould. You've got to be more specific. Okay, all of them. Whether we're talking about the mould on the peaches in my dining room or a clay mould. I don't know why I'm doing that. We spell it M-O-U-L-D. Well, I think my British viewers can work out where this is going. In the United States, that U doesn't exist. But just like with the word manoeuvre, both of these spellings were found in American English writings in the 19th century and before. It's just that one of those writings happened to not be Webster's dictionary, in which only the four-letter U-less spelling was included. And again, much like manoeuvre, it wasn't until about the 20th century that this mould variant really started to spread. I've just realised that makes it sound like an epidemic. But there are other types of examples that display Webster's absolute disdain for the letter U. Another such example is the word plow, as in snow plow. I can't emphasise enough how vastly different these spellings are, so I'm just going to show you. In Britain, we spell plow P-L-O-U-G-H. In America, Webster had the good sense to see that it doesn't have to be this way. Never mind your silent g at the end of the word. There are way too many vowels in the word plow, so sort your life out is what he said. I'm paraphrasing. And so again, in his dictionary, the spelling that Americans know today was in fact the choice that he went with at the time. That's despite the fact, once again, that at the time both spellings were kicking about, but as the 19th century wore on, American English text kept churning the same spelling again and again, and that spelling was P-L-O-W. Now, I've touched on the fact that Noah Webster did this to simplify the language and also to give American English its own identity. But I have another pretty wild theory. I think he did this because he, and just Americans in general, have this enduring affinity with straight lines. Think about it. This is, as I've said many a time, the country of rectangles. It's also a country in which much of the border separating the US and Canada is literally the 49th parallel. Straight lines are the bedrock of American society because it speaks to another thing that Americans like to hear, and that is stability. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. I think the letter U, as well as being superfluous to the pronunciation and spelling of a word, just has too much of a curve on it for Americans to get behind. And so if a word can be said without specific curved letters, Noah Webster will find a way. And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Lawrence, you're looking way too deeply into this. And to that I say, that's what I do. Which is why I found a natural kindred spirit in today's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is a learning platform with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and artificial intelligence. Its main focus is to be uniquely effective, and what I really like about that is that Brilliant emphasizes not just what we learn, but the methods by which we learn. For instance, did you find it useful when you had that teacher who would just read straight from the textbook? No, you'd fall asleep at your desk. The lessons that I remember best are the ones in which we got to learn by doing, and this is where Brilliant's lessons really stand out. To that end, Brilliant sharpens your ability to think critically, which is a far more meaningful investment than, memorizing facts only to forget them once the test is done. On that score, a skill set common among YouTube sensations is data analysis, the ability to evaluate our YouTube data in an increasingly algorithmic world. Well, Brilliant just rolled out loads of new data-related lessons, all of which are perfect for not just content creators like me, but people with real jobs and interests. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/lostinthepond. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. The link is in my description below. Now, in case you are skeptical about my wild theory, let's consider for a moment a word I used 2 seconds ago, and that word is skeptical. And in this point in your notepad, you're writing, Lawrence, you already did a YouTube short about this. We know why this happened. And yes, officially, the C was swapped for a K to avoid pronunciation confusion. Somebody could look at the word skeptic with a C and think, ooh, that must be pronounced septic. And you might also be thinking, this isn't particularly a lesser-known spelling difference, and you lied to us, Lawrence. I didn't lie. I'm just using this example as a build-in to my actual example, which is the word mollusk. Mollusks are pointless creatures with shells, is about the best description I can give you. But nonetheless, it is a word that I don't find myself using very often. But when I do, I spell it M-O-L-L-U-S-C. In America this week, while reading about mollusks, I discovered that it's spelled with a K. Now, I can't seem to find the reason why this happened, except that K is made entirely of straight lines. But what I do know is that throughout American history, it's had an oddly consistent trend of being more popular than the C spelling. I can't believe we're talking about this. And then there's the American propensity to swap S's for Z's. Famously, this is seen in words like realize and countless other words that in British English end with the suffix ise. But it's by no means only those types of words. Because it occurred to me the other day that there was a point in history after I moved to the United States that I stopped spelling the word cozy, C-O-S-Y, and adopted the American variant, C-O-Z-Y, Z-Y. Now, neither spelling of cozy featured in Webster's dictionary, but records indicate that they did both pop up in American English in the 19th century. By the 20th, the Z spelling started to take off. And that shouldn't surprise anyone, especially those of you who've seen the video in which I talk about America's obsession with the letter Z, specifically around the time of the Great Depression. And the Jazz Age spawned several Z-heavy words, like snazzy, pizzazz, Twizzlers, and future astronaut Buzz Aldrin. So it was perhaps little wonder that one of the nation's favorite meals became so popular at about that time. Pizza. And I guarantee it, if Italians had called pizza something like Bellagio, it simply wouldn't have taken off in America, and that's a fact that I've just made up. I want to quickly talk to you about the word artifact, the definition of which is an object that might be discovered by, I don't know, an archaeologist, which, while we're on the subject, is an example of a word in which American English usually retains the AE spelling, while Americans are almost always likely to spell the word artifact, A-R-T-I-F-A-C-T. fact. In Britain, we can't decide between this spelling and one that has an E in place of the I. Like, to this day, I still get confused whenever I type that word. And Americans might be thinking, why would you put an E in it? Well, one thing you should know, my fellow Americans, is that the E spelling used to exist in American English and was in fact the original spelling of this word in the English language. And you might be thinking, what's going on there? And the truth is that while the word artifact did originate within Latin, it entered English via the Italian word artefatto, spelled with an E. The I spelling didn't crop up until much later, when it was probably decided that, oh, sod the Italian connection. We want this word to mirror the spelling of similar words like artificial. And finally, omelet, a word that did not feature in Webster's dictionary, presumably because he didn't live long enough to experience the majesty of American diners. American English has settled on a version of the word that looks decidedly less French than what I grew up with in Britain. And that's because a lot of the menus that I've encountered at said diners, like, cut off 2 whole letters from the end of the word. So instead of O-M-E-L-E-T-T-E, it's O-M-E-L-E-T. And again, I can't help but think that if you write that word in lowercase, T and especially E are uncomfortably curvy, so they're gone. And I think just like with a lot of the changes that were made to American spellings, it does mean that it's less of a mouthful, which I suppose is particularly useful when you're eating an omelette. And that brings us to our epilogue, a word which another of my patrons, Paul, pointed out has an alternate spelling that you'll sometimes see in American English, in which the U and the E are dropped to spell epilogue like this. If you would like to follow in Paul's footsteps and become a patron of Lost in the Pond yourself, you can do so today at patreon.com/lostinthepond or by clicking the join button below. Until the next video, goodbye.